Good evening, and thank you all for joining us for our meeting of the African American Task Force Education Subcommittee. My name is Representative Medina Wilson-Anton, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the committee, and I'll be starting off our meeting on behalf of Representative Moore. We're going to start with attendance. Caitlin, if you could help go through the roll and see if we have a quorum.
Absolutely. Representative Moore. Representative Wilson-Anton.
Present.
Christine Aloyas. Tiffany Savage. Kyrie Bay. Simone Philpox. Gloria Ho.
Present.
Amanda Homan.
Present.
Leslie Footman. Jamie Bailey.
Present.
Dr. Dania Woods. Stephanie Ingram.
Good evening. Present.
Krista Davis. Eric Anderson. Jermaine Solomon.
Present.
Dr. Pepakai. Dr. Rouser. Ginny Forcucci.
Present.
Monique Martin.
Present.
Dr. Tasia McCove.
Present.
Dr. Michael Harp.
Present.
Charito Calvachi Mateco.
Present.
And as we started attendance, I see Kyrie Bay has joined us. So we do have a quorum.
Great, so we'll go to the next agenda item, acceptance of our meeting minutes. So I think I need to entertain a motion to accept the minutes. Is there a motion?
Stephanie Ingram, so moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Gloria Ho, I second.
Thank you. Caitlin, can you keep track of the votes on that motion?
Yes, I will just go through roll again, and I'm just going to go in order that people are showing up on my panelist list. Amanda Holman.
Yes.
Charito Calvachi Mateco.
Yes.
Okay. Jermaine Solomon.
Yes.
Gloria Ho.
Yes.
Jamie Bailey.
Yes.
Ginny Forcucci.
Yes.
Kyrie Bay.
Yes.
Representative Wilson-Anton.
Yes.
Dr. Michael Harp.
Yes.
Thank you. Monique Martin.
Yes.
Stephanie Ingram.
Yes.
Dr. Tasia McCove.
Yes.
Okay, so we have all members present voting yes to approve the minutes, and we are also now joined by Representative Moore.
All right, welcome, Representative. And so at this point, we will turn it over to our subgroup that's presenting for the evening, and I will put myself on mute.
Hi, good evening. I'm Gloria Ho, and I guess I'm the first one up from our subcommittee, the Poverty and SEL subcommittee that's presenting. I am so sorry, were we supposed to have provided the slide presentation?
I can provide them.
Okay, if not, I will pull it up. I just wasn't, I guess we should have clarified that, sorry. I can pull it up though.
Okay, if you can, that's great. I believe you should have the ability to share your screen.
Are you guys able to see that?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, and all right, thank you. I'm just gonna get situated here really quick. Okay, so we are the SEL and Poverty Subcommittee. It was myself, Amanda Homan, and Dr. Tasia McCove, and we'll introduce ourselves as we go through each of our sections. So mine was the first section. And again, I'm Gloria Ho. I'm a school social worker at Milton Elementary School in Cape Henlopen School District. I'm a proud exec board member of the DSCA and a co-chair of the Ethnic Minority Affairs Committee, and also a co-president of the School Social Workers Association of Delaware. I was tasked with presenting on best practices for addressing student trauma and what steps Delaware has taken to meet student needs. So to begin doing so, we need to begin with talking about social emotional learning as a whole. So,
one moment, Gloria, I'm sorry to interrupt you. If you could just put it in presentation mode.
Okay, I'm so sorry. How do I do that? Is that
At the top right hand, there's a present button. I think that might be it. I don't usually use Google Slides.
did that do it?
Well,
No.
you want to go back to your other tab, to the slide tab, the top, poverty and SEL, all the way. Yeah, a little bit up.
I'm so sorry. Let me try this again. I have too many.
Next time when you go to that section, hit from the beginning. I think that should work.
So
yeah, if you just scroll up to the top of your screen where it says poverty and SEL.
This one here?
No, on the right.
Close this tab. Close this tab out.
Is that it? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry about that. That's all right. I'm so sorry. There's like so much stuff up on my screen. All right. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So in this slide, we have the definition of social emotional learning as defined by CASEL, which stands for the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. It is a nonprofit and nonpartisan leader of the social emotional learning movement for over 20 years. They evaluate programming, they curate research, they inform legislation, and they partner on implementation with states and school districts. They are committed to evidence-based SEL to support all students' learning and development. So here, I'll just read it really quick. Social and emotional learning, SEL, from here on out is an integral part of education and human development. SEL is a process through which all young people and adults acquire and apply the knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, and achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, and make responsible and caring decisions. SEL advances educational equity and excellence through authentic school, family, community partnerships to establish learning environments and experiences that feature trusting and collaborative relationships, rigorous and meaningful curriculum and instruction, and ongoing evaluation. SEL can help address various forms of inequity and empower young people and adults to co-create thriving schools and contribute to safe, healthy, and just communities. Okay. Okay, this next slide is, this graphic is the CASEL 5, sorry. 5 broad interrelated areas of competence. So there's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and then responsible decision-making. So Delaware has adopted the 5 competency areas. Okay, and so the CASEL 5 can be taught and applied at various developmental stages, from childhood to adulthood and across diverse cultural contexts. Many school districts, states, and countries have used the CASEL 5 to establish preschool to high school learning standards and competencies that articulate what students should know and be able to do for academic success, school and civic engagement, health and wellness, and then fulfilling careers. All right, so the Castle State SEL and Workforce Initiative. So the integration of social and emotional SEL and workforce and education policy has been a strategic priority of Castle's Collaborative States Initiative, CSI, since 2019. Through these state partnerships, they launched the SEL and Workforce Initiative in 2020, strategically supporting teams in 8 states. So Delaware, Kansas, Nevada, North Dakota, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Utah, and Wisconsin. These are the 8 states. And I feel so fortunate that in Delaware that we are one of the 8 that were leading in this. So that really made when it comes to talking about trauma-informed care, we're very fortunate that we are in a state that I believe is helping to lead the way in this. So let me see here. Okay, so these next slides will address the collaboration between Castle and the state of Delaware and their key findings. As I said, what's exciting is that Delaware is helping to lead the way in trauma-informed care. Since its creation in 2016, Castle's Collaborating States Initiative has scaled state-level SEL work from 8 states to now over 40 states and 1 US territory. So representing more than 90% of districts, schools, teachers, and students in the US. Okay. So your typical approach to SEL might not be enough heading into this school year. The intensive needs of students this year suggests that all of our social emotional learning efforts must be trauma-informed this year. SEL with a trauma-informed lens will help students heal, cope, and build resilience in the face of challenging circumstances. Okay, so to start with, what is trauma-informed SEL? Trauma-informed SEL is an approach to SEL in schools, and that it's particularly inclusive to children who have experienced trauma. Trauma-informed SEL practices, such as creating predictable routines and building supportive relationships, can help students build the skills they need to deal with toxic stress and overcome difficult life circumstances. All right, so in October 2018, Governor Carney signed Executive Order 24, making Delaware a trauma-informed state. Okay, next. So some of the next few slides are just going to talk about the why for trauma-informed care in SEL. So here, a trauma-informed SEL cultural awareness model of supports allows educators to create a safe environment to address trauma and SEL skill building while also tapping into the strengths and opportunities of students' cultures. As reported in the Committee for Children, the white paper research, studies show that children who grow up in poverty are much more likely to be exposed to negative environments that have direct and lasting effects on brain development, compromising their chances for success. Self-regulation skills can help children of all backgrounds succeed in school, reduce problem behaviors, and become more socially and emotionally competent. Not surprisingly, poor children with stronger self-regulation skills fare better than those with weaker skills. Schools can't change the fact that some families are poor, but by teaching all kids self-regulation skills, they can help mediate the effects of childhood poverty. Okay, so school educators can take 4 primary approaches to implementing SEL. 1 is direct instruction on social and emotional skills. 2 is an integration of SEL with academic content. 3 is the development of a positive learning environment. And 4 is general teaching practices that support student development and application of social and emotional skills. Okay. So, okay. So going to our recommendations, we have, for my section, I had the 6. The first one making SEL a priority in school districts and states. So although teachers say that supporting the development of social and emotional competencies is important, few think they have the time to incorporate SEL, given other demands that appear to assume a higher priority. So to make SEL a priority within the state or district, state and district leaders can develop policies, guidance, and standards that specifically address student, social, and emotional competencies. Legislators and policymakers should provide publicly funded schools and preschools with funds necessary to develop school-wide action plans addressing the needs of traumatized children and to decrease punitive responses. Policies and guidance can include, sorry about that. Policies and guidance can include ways to connect SEL to other behavioral and academic supports. For example, disciplinary policies or restorative practices, processes for integrating SEL into other important district efforts, or the development of SEL standards. The second recommendation, integrate SEL into academic instruction. As with academic skills, students need opportunities to learn, develop, and apply their social and emotional competencies. Students can develop social and emotional competencies through multiple avenues. 3 examples. 1, explicit skill instruction, in which educators take instructional time to teach social and emotional competencies. For example, a lesson might focus on how to take the perspective of others and on the importance of students understanding viewpoints besides their own. A second example, incorporating SEL through general teaching practices. For example, a teacher might incorporate group work to solve a math problem, reinforcing individual and collective responsibility during the lesson so that students understand the positive and negative consequences of the way they participate in the group activity. And third, integrating social and emotional competencies into academic instruction. So for example, a social studies teacher might take 15 minutes at the beginning of a lesson to teach problem-solving skills. This new skill could be applied later during a lesson on Lewis and Clark, allowing students to use their problem-solving skills while analyzing the exploration of Lewis and Clark. Third, creating environments that promote SEL. So another approach to integrating SEL is by developing a positive learning environment and creating the conditions for learning. So students in a healthy, safe, supportive, and challenging environment have greater capacity to focus on academic content and are more likely to engage in school. Environments that support SEL, developing a discipline policy that supports inclusionary practices, again, restorative practices, and encourages students to regulate their own behavior. Ensure that each student has an adult to whom he or she can turn to for assistance and guidance. So people who work in schools, think about your check-in and check-out system, your mentoring programs, things like that. Another example, engaging students to be active members of the school community with a voice of their own. Set high behavioral and academic expectations for all students, taking into account student differences and baseline social and emotional and academic competencies. Support adult social and emotional competencies as well as relationship building among staff members. We're supposed to be role modeling for them. And engaging parents and the school community to support student social and emotional competencies. Number 4, providing training and support for SEL programs and practices. So to implement SEL practices effectively and support the development of the whole child, educators need training and support in all aspects of implementing SEL. So ways to support and train teachers include techniques to provide professional development on what SEL is, why it's important, and how it connects to academic skills. Collaborate with evidence-based SEL programs to give teachers the training, resources, and tools to teach social and emotional skills. Incorporate social and emotional learning practices into classroom observations, walkthroughs, peer observations, providing feedback to educators on SEL practices, and implementing professional learning communities, the PLCs, that allow educators to discuss SEL practices. Teachers and administrators should learn approaches and strategies for teaching children who may be traumatized. Mental health professionals, your specialists, your counselors, your school social workers, your psychologists, provide services in school settings should respond appropriately to trauma-related learning and behavior problems and should provide trauma-informed consultation to educators. Number 5, coordinate efforts to support all systems. So efforts to promote SEL work best when they are coordinated and aligned with other district programs and initiatives. District leaders play a critical role in creating supportive policies and providing funding and time to integrate SEL into the district's core functions. Specific areas for SEL integration include existing programs that support students' interpersonal and intrapersonal skills, character or self-discipline. Instructional programs that promote student engagement, persistence, and collaboration. Academic curriculum across subjects. School improvement plans that target school level efforts. School-based or school-linked counseling or mental health services. After-school programs and out-of-school time efforts. Programs for college and career readiness, and particularly those on employability or 21st century skills. Tiered intervention systems, such as positive behavioral intervention and supports, the PBS, PBIS, whichever you call it, which promote the positive pro-social behavior among all students, as well as the multi-tiered systems of support, which is the MTSS, which supports the needs of all students. And behavior management and disciplinary practices, again, such as restorative practices, I'm a huge fan of that, which supports student inclusion rather than exclusionary disciplinary practices. And finally, the Department of Education should continue to provide information and support to schools. So focusing on SEL may actually be an antidote to fragmentation. Some districts have used SEL as a framework to organize and consolidate many related but previously disconnected efforts, such as student engagement, discipline, and service learning. When adults bring an SEL lens to all school activities, modeling SEL to establish a learning culture and climate of connection and safety, they enable students to experience the relevance of SEL lessons in many aspects of their lives. And then lastly, using data to assess progress. So assessing students' social and emotional competencies is a complex yet important area to consider when providing support and resources to districts and schools implementing SEL. Research should be funded on the extent to which learning and behavioral problems at school are related to untreated childhood trauma and on best school-wide and individual practices for addressing the educational needs. So although SEL assessment is still an emerging area, recent guidance has published on when and how to assess student SEL competencies. And one of the research papers that I tagged on here, they had an assessment of, a suite of tools. There are 5 major factors to consider when deciding whether to collect and analyze data on student social and emotional competencies. And I won't go into each one because they're so long, but it's basically the purpose. Determine your reasons to collect the data on student social emotional competencies, for accountability reasons, to communicate about SEL, to provide information to the district, school, or classroom teacher about student needs, or is it to improve practice? And then the other areas were researching rigor, practicality, burden, and then ethics. So that was the end of my parts. And thank you very much. I'm going to turn it over to Amanda. Once I figure out how. Okay. Sorry.
Before we move on to the next section, can we bring those recommendations up for that section? And
Yes,
just look into
okay.
the committee for some feedback. So how this work group did their recommendation is by subtopic of their overarching topic. So they have three different recommendations that they will be bringing, three sets of recommendations they will bringing forward tonight, and this is the first set. So based upon the information that Ms. Ho just presented to us, I would just render time and questions to the subcommittee to discuss what is being presented to us right now. I guess I'll go first. This week, social emotional learning teaching was on harassment for my class, but does the state of Delaware already require SEL as a part of school's curriculum, or is it just a recommendation from the Department of Education?
So as far as what the law says, you're asking, is there anything in Delaware law that requires schools to teach SEL?
Yes.
Okay, so, I think, I know just from my experience, and I am by no way an expert on this, I do know that there are standards. So, for example, I know that like Delaware has an anti-bullying legislation, and part of that is having a program in place that teaches, like for my level elementary, which is what I know, that we focus on those social emotional competencies of like empathy, emotion management, things like that. For the upper grades, I am not sure. I don't know if somebody else can speak better on that.
I know when I was researching, stuff for this presentation, there are like social emotional standards that are specific to early childhood. And then we have like Delaware has social and emotional competencies, like we mentioned before, that were created like collaboratively with Castle. Now, I wasn't 100% sure if this law versus like strongly encouraged, you should be incorporating it, but there's no specified like exact way, at least not from what I've read so far.
I feel like I'm not a school counselor, I'm a school social worker, but I feel like if anyone on here is a school counselor, or I just feel just from knowing and working with school counselors that there is a certain level of requirement, I think from their perspective and their role in schools, that they have to provide some type of social emotional learning. Again, I'm not an expert and I can't speak on that. But going back to Amanda's point about Governor Carney signing Executive Order 24 about, Delaware has made a commitment to those 5 competency areas. And I believe that is what the whole movement and the whole initiative is to make sure, like, I know when this all rolled out, we were getting trainings and things like that. And I believe the expectation is that we are bringing this back to school and implementing these things to become trauma-informed schools, to be using things like restorative practices, things like that.
I can kind of speak to a committee that I am on that is actually a large committee. I think I brought this up even with the culturally responsive standards, that this is a process that we're still in now with Terry Lawler. I'm actually in contact with Sabra also, where we are implementing them. I kind of assisted in doing it for health and PE and some of the other exploratory subjects. So it is something that's in the pipeline. Also being on the professional standards board, it's something that is going to be coming up very soon for us. As far as it being written into a law wherever, I mean, you're being evaluated for this in there. My district is very big on the restorative practices with responsive classroom. So these are things that are definitely, and when I even say responsive classrooms, they are there's different levels to being trauma informed, and we're all at different levels throughout the state and different school districts. So it's something that is definitely in the pipeline. There's a lot of hands in it, community districts. But as far as it being a concrete thing, not yet. We actually have a meeting on January, I missed the 16th, January 18th, where we're going to come back together again and get this ball rolling a little bit further. A person that we should reach out to if we really want to get some information on this is Terry Lawler, who is a champion of this. And I've been through many trainings and courses and have implemented these standards from Castle. And also I'm making micro credentials for COSM, which is Coalition of Schools Educating Mindfully. So we are actually combining mindfulness-based learning along with social emotional learning to kind of give teachers that supplemental training within SEL. And if anyone needs information, I have a large, I have a lot of resources for you. I'm actually going to connect with Sabra within, I believe, tomorrow, because I'm using those within Colonial School District for all new and first and second year teachers that go through some form of SEL, trauma informed, or brain architecture, so that they're understanding why children are coming this way. So please reach out to me and I can get you some more information. And by no means am I an expert, so.
Thank you so much for referencing Dr. Lawler, because as I was going through this, I thought of her because, yeah, a valuable asset. And you're right. I think if you want more information, again, I too am not an expert, but Delaware, I mean, there's the Delaware Trauma Informed Network, there's DOE, there's what Kyrie referenced, a bigger committee that I believe was partnered with that collaborative, with the whole collaborative with Castle. So again, that's where doing the research, I was very proud of Delaware to be one of those 8 states and to be ahead of the game in this. It's amazing.
Sharito, you could go ahead.
Thank you. Just a short comment in when I hear this word expertise. You know, I am very, very much conscientious. I lived 30 years of my life in Latin America. So then I came to here. So in some way, I am completely in the depth of the culture. And I'm very much conscientious that that collective societies think and see the world in a very different way, that when you are made in this and built in this world, which is in America, which is a very individualistic society. And so when I hear I'm not expertise in this and expertise in that, I always try to see us, all of us, in the sense that we are experts in being humans. And that is something wonderful that each one of you bring. And I think that should be a spirit in which we have this conversation, because I don't think there is such a thing as an expert in circle process, for example. And I am not an expert in circle process, but I do have more experience than many others that don't do almost on a daily basis circles. So that is different in you know, but I bring that. And the reason why I make this comment is that in what we are doing, I think is, for me, it's so important that whatever we agree and doing and everything, it has to include the experience, not much how much we know about the subject of trauma, as much as that whatever we do invites the transformation of the school through students, academics, and administrators experience what it is to have a dialogue of respect in a profound way, because that, even regardless of whether you understand what trauma is what is going to make the change. And that is my hope for this task force, that we will bring the idea of collective societies that experience what it is to be with one another, dependent and being interdependent and interconnected with one another, more than all the knowledge that we can bring, which is important too. But if we, at the end, are we going to make a change in Delaware? It has to be through a very conscientious effort that we will allow students to, teachers and administrators to experience something that is different from the commonality that we have now, that is bringing these bad results of alienation, separation, and otherness.
Thank you so much for those comments, Sharito. I just want to acknowledge that you made a lot of pointers that, we all need. I believe we keep in the forefront of our mind, but often need to be reminded as we do this coursework. At first, we're human, and those experiences that we have gone through as we do this coursework should remain in the forefront of our minds. I know one of the reasons why I wanted to have this subcommittee is because I know what it means to be a student in the Delaware public school system. I know growing up, what I lacked in curriculum and in just academic spaces, whether it's things that I wasn't taught in the curriculum, resources that me or some other peers needed that was lacking, even from just being a teacher of what I see day to day, being on the front lines. So thank you for that acknowledgement, because I think that is the core of what drive our coursework, is the experience. Whether if you weren't a Delaware public school student, you at least know the things that is necessary in trying to make sure that, to your point, what are we going to do? I already am talking to Caitlin on the back end that with all these recommendations, it's going to come legislation, and just refocusing what these outcomes are going to look like. These are not just some suggestions that's going to sit on paper. I am going to do something about it. I want to do something about it. The individuals who have agreed to be a part of this subcommittee wants to do something about it. So I am going to remain optimistic. I'm leaning on my co-chair on her words that she just spoke into my life. We're going to remain optimistic that this work will be done. I also want to thank Mr. Bay for giving out some information that I didn't know was happening. I'm glad to hear what Red Clay is doing, and I definitely would like to see if you could send me what that policy looks like in language, because I, as someone who teaches SEL and knows that whether the school is titled a trauma-informed school or not, because they have a high poverty rate or not, I believe that all students, especially coming out of the pandemic, need some type of emotional learning, because I tell you, I see it every day. I'm literally teaching children how to talk to one another. I was just talking to my son's kindergarten teacher, and the kindergartners have not seen facial expressions outside of their family members, because they're used, they're pandemic babies, and they're used to seeing people with a mask. So, there are a lot of things that is normal to us that is not normal to some of the new generation that's entering into the school system. And these are the things that we need to take into account and to consider. I think Amanda wanted to say something. I saw you do no, I just wanted to make sure everyone gets their time. You good? All right. Okay.
Amanda she is next, I think, right, to present.
Okay.
Yes, but I believe you mentioned you wanted to do the recommendations piece by piece, or are we okay to save them for the end?
So I just wanted to see if we had questions so far on the presentation. So that way, at the end, we can just go through all the recommendations that you all have came up with, and we can vote for them. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So I don't see any more hands, so I'm going to go ahead and you have the green light to move on. Thank you.
Okay, so see if I can get this going. Okay, then you guys say hit present. Okay, so good evening. My name is Amanda Homan. I am a math teacher at Dover High School. I've been teaching math for, this is now year 11. And I was on the equity committee at my previous district, and I was the advisor to their Black Student Union. So my topic that I focused on was low socioeconomic status. So, you know, our overarching topic was social emotional learning. But the reality is within that, you do have subgroups that kind of have certain things that impact them more than others. So especially with your low socioeconomic status students, there's just a lot of things that we have to put in perspective for students that are dealing with poverty, or students that have additional struggles that make, you know, could make something as simple as just waking up to get to school a little bit harder. So what I just kind of focused on was just presenting information from research and some statistics to just show the impact that poverty and the low socioeconomic status does have on education. So with that being said, the first one, according to the US Census Bureau, this was from 2014, individuals within the top family income quartile are 8 times more likely to obtain a bachelor's degree by age 24 as compared to individuals from the lowest family income quartile. Low socioeconomic status and exposure to adversity are linked to decreased educational success. Such toxic stress in early childhood leads to lasting impacts on learning, behavior, and health. Deemer and Bluestein found that racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic barriers generally hinder individuals' vocational development. Career barriers are significantly higher for those from poor backgrounds, people of color, women, those who are disabled, and LGBTIQ identified individuals. So here's just a statistic, and this is kind of along the lines that I think as, you know, most of us are educators, so we understand the earlier you start your educational journey, the better off you tend to land. Well, statistics show that a lot of times your students in poverty, they're starting later. So here we have children who are 200% below federal poverty threshold. They're more likely to not be enrolled in nursery school, preschool, or like a legitimate childcare program where they're able to get that early learning. So just right off the bat, you're starting off at a disadvantage. And that's before you're actually entering your public K-12. So the more effects of low socioeconomic status on education. So this slide stood out to me the most, and I'll explain after I go over them. So prospective college students from low socioeconomic status backgrounds are less likely to have access to informational resources about college. Additionally, compared to high socioeconomic status counterparts, young adults from low socioeconomic status backgrounds are at a higher risk of accruing student loan debt burdens that exceed the national average. A study showed that individuals from a lower social class generally had less career-related self-efficacy when it came to vocational aspirations. Those from higher social class backgrounds tend to be more successful in developing career aspirations and are generally better prepared for the world of work because of access to resources such as career offices, guidance counselors, better schools, high-level social actors, and familiar experience with higher education. So, you know, stepping aside from the statistics and all the fancy words, right? It always comes down to your exposure. What are you around? What do you see? And, you know, I think we hear this a lot where we talk about privilege and people are kind of like, as long as you work hard, you're going to be fine. As long as you work hard, everybody has the opportunity. But we understand that when you have certain access to information right in your home, that gives you an opportunity right then and there that other people don't get. So children, they don't have a choice where they're born, where they live, what school they go to. These are all decisions that are made by somebody else. They have no control over that. So for me, as somebody that was born into a family of two parents that obtained their master's degree, dad was in the military. Of course, you know, going to college was a little easier to access because I had the model at home. They knew exactly what I needed to do because they already did it. Versus somebody else who's going to be a first generation student, their parents may not know how to help them because they never went through it. So they're relying on possibly their teachers, possibly their guidance counselors, possibly their principals. But again, these are a lot of possibles versus actually having that information at home. So a big factor that I found in a lot of the research is just simply access to information. And it really comes down to your environment and what you're exposed to. So the next, and this I think probably impacts us the most now, especially considering the teacher shortage that we're currently dealing with. A teacher's years of experience and quality of training are correlated with children's academic achievement. Children in low-income schools are less likely to have well-qualified teachers. The success rate of low-income students in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics disciplines is much lower than that of students who do not come from underrepresented backgrounds. Students who were randomly assigned to higher quality classrooms in grades K through 3 earn more, were more likely to attend college, save more for retirement, and lived in better neighborhoods. So again, it just comes down to your opportunities and what you were exposed to. If you're in a position where maybe you grew up in a district where the teaching, the teachers is sort of kind of revolving door, you're getting a lot of people that are kind of in and out. We know as teachers, those first few years, you're kind of getting your foot in. And then after a while, you start to get a more solid system. So I can say like now I'm probably a lot stronger, you know, than I was my first couple of years. Well, and you know, no disrespect to somebody being brand new, but the reality is you're not going to want your student to have all brand new teachers who are still trying to learn the way. So when you have students that are growing up in districts or in areas where you have a lot of brand new teachers or a lot of substitutes or a lot of missing teachers, these are students that are potentially missing out on a lot of information that's generally going to affect their success, especially in those earlier years. Again, we know that solid foundation really sets the tone for pretty much the rest of their matriculation. So just to put an image to the information, this is simple SAT information. So family income, and it's showing SAT scores based on the family income. So you can see very consistently as the family income increases, so does the SAT scores, the average SAT scores. So again, it is not about I have more money, so I'm smarter. It really comes down to access and exposure. So the recommendations for closing gaps associated with socioeconomic status, the first one would be to create an information-rich environment. So more so than saying, hey, there's pamphlets in the guidance office if you're interested, really making sure that we're creating systems where that information is forced in both parents and children's hands, that we're really investing in making sure that our students, especially our low SES students, have the means to learn about these paths that they may not know about based on where they are or, you know, based on what they have around them with their family or environment. Build a learning community. So again, just incorporating everybody in the process. Continuous professional development. I think with a lot of the issues around SEL, and I think what could make it harder even for experienced teachers is students change, times change. So we have to continue to be refreshed. I think the way I handle my students now is not the way I could have handled them 11 years ago, because they are very much different students. They respond differently. I can't handle them the way I was handled. Be quiet and sit down because I said so was fine for my generation. But for this generation, they need to understand why, because they have access to information right here at all times. So we have to be able to evolve in our mindset and shift our mentality and say, okay, this is a new group of kids. I'm going to have to change my ways as they change. So that continuous professional development and kind of stepping outside our comfort zone really makes the difference. Involvement of parents. So from the beginning, making sure that we keep them informed, we keep them a part of the process. We're inviting them in the conversations. We're bringing them to the table for both, not only just to say like, hey, this is what we're doing, but including them in the decision-making, including them in the planning, including them in the development, but more so just making sure we're getting their feedback on what they need. I feel like I could have a lot of opinions on what somebody else needs, but it's not my life. It's not what I grew up with. So it's important for me to ask them like, hey, is this good for you? And a good example I'll give is I actually saw this post that stuck out to me talking about the food bank. And they were talking about all these great things that people like to donate to food banks. Like they were like the canned goods, but a lot of people don't have can openers. Or they'll talk about people like to donate cereal, but then some of the people that rely on the food bank don't have access to like milk. So just really asking like, what do you need? And then making a plan to assist people in what they genuinely need. And then increased funding and resources. I know Dr. McCoy is going to talk more about that. But Delaware doesn't, every source of funding isn't permanent. So for Delaware, we may want to consider looking at some opportunities to make sure that there's permanent funding that we know is always going to be there for our low SCS students. And so it's not a matter of, I think as far as planning and implementing programs, districts can invest and commit in it more if they know that money's always going to be there. You don't want to like commit to something when a grant could be up in a couple of years and then you're back to square one potentially. So I think if we are saying that this is important, and I mean, we just saw even as simple as SAT stats, like that's significant. So if we're saying that this is important, then we need to make this a permanent part of our funding. And that is my recommendations for SCS. I guess I didn't have to make my screen smaller, sorry.
Right. Thank you, Ms. Holman. At this time, I open it up for any questions or any clarifications that may be needed on these set of recommendations.
Hey, it's Jenny. It's good to see everybody. Thank you so much, ladies, for the presentation thus far. It's been really informative and really helpful and always inspiring. The question I have, Representative Moore, is around language when we make the recommendations. Will the recommendations, will we get to wordsmith any of the recommendations, or will they remain exactly as we see them tonight if we vote yes on them?
So how this is going to work is, I believe in February, a report for the African American Task Force is due. So what we're going to do, the recommendations that we have will be ended up being wordsmithed properly, but that will always go through the subcommittee for approval because anything that we approve has to go through the actual task force, the African American Task Force Committee for approval with the actual phrases and everything.
Okay. When I was listening to Ms. Holman, because you know this, most of us, I assume, have been in classrooms or definitely are engaged in our schools, in our communities. And number 4, I often hear buildings, districts, schools say, oh, the parents aren't involved, and they put the onus on the parent instead of building intentional bridges with parents and community. So when I was looking at number 4, I just don't want someone to fall back on, oh, it's all responsibility of the parent and the family and the caretakers, right? So that's all I was, because you said it, Ms. Holman, like when you expanded on it, you totally, completely said it. But I was just thinking if someone's reading these cold without context, they could misinterpret that. And it's really buildings, LEAs, districts, all of it, we have to be so committed in creating these authentic, intentional, real, and not just bringing parents in, we need to be going out, right? Like we need to be in the communities we are serving. And so I was just thinking about that with number 4, because that's just something I'm super passionate about. Thank you.
So the 5 recommendations that I listed here, they were actually, and I apologize because I meant to add the citation. So these came from research that I found, so I can add it later to the Google Doc, because I believe you guys have the Google link, so I can add the citation later. But I left it broad as they kind of stated it because I knew from the last meeting, Representative Moore mentioned that these were kind of general and they were going to get fine-tuned later. But I'm with you. Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you, Jenny, as well. So all the recommendations will be, so every meeting is being recorded and there are minutes being taken in the meeting, from the meeting. So all of this will be compiled into a report. And before we put the report out, everyone will have a say to make sure that this is what you want, this is what each recommendation should say. To the point about parent involvement, it's a misconception that, especially for Title I schools, that parents don't want to be involved, and that's false and just miscommunicated. Whether they have the opportunity or, to your point that was just made, you may have to go out and do some extra work to make sure they get involved because of socioeconomics, and it may take a little more work. At the end of the day, a lot of parents want to know what's going on. But it's also up to the educator to be able to understand and comprehend where they're teaching at and who they are teaching and how to make them successful. Every year I start out making calls to my students, parents, and talking to the parent on how to help me to build a success plan for our students. And a lot of them want to be there with them as much as they can and know how to. So with parent involvement, that definitely is not just, I want to be clear, it's not just placing the onus on the parents itself, but it takes the school, it takes the parent and the child for a child to be successful. Now there are the outliers where, due to some family circumstances that the parent may not be involved. But again, due to a lot of what Amanda stated in her presentation, these generations are different. And the access of information is right at their fingertips, but they need to be directed on how to be appropriately used. Students do want to understand, why are you telling me this? Because this says X, Y, and Z, and I need to help connect the bridge. Teachers are there to help connect the bridges sometimes, and even may have to stand in the gap and give students what they may need. That is what it means to be an educator. So all of that will be taken into consideration once I read over the notes and before I have them send out to the committee as well for the second input. Go ahead, Gloria.
Could I? It's Kari.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kari. Go ahead.
I just wanted to, just because we're on the topic of parents and also we're dealing in the socioeconomic status. There's a study that was done by Penn State in the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. This is training that I have been through DOE and DSEA 3-4 years ago. And to address the issue with why on the grassroots, not on the boots on the ground level, is that there's a lot of individual level barriers, such as implicit bias in school staff that engenders low expectations and disengagement for students of color and marginalized youth and their families. But it's also a level that we need to address is educator stress and burnout, which actually reduces the safety and productivity of the classroom and the educator's ability to model the SEL skills that we're trying to establish. And I think that's where we have to really pinpoint it on this subject, on at least this portion, is that we are not just looking to educate the teacher once they get in the classroom, but this is something that we have to also make sure that this is mandatory training, that these new teachers that come in are not blown away by the school that they step into. We have many student teachers who go to these places and they never come back to them, or they come from somewhere else and have no idea what they're doing when they get there or what the school's true issues are. So I just wanted to, I'm going to give the a link to the study that they did. We've used this before through DOE training and DSE training, and I think it would actually add to what we're trying to do now. And I also don't want to put the carriage in front of the horse, because I'm sure we have a few more presenters that are going to cover some of these other things. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you. Gloria, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to circle back really quick to what Jenny said. I thought it was very important. And as a subcommittee member, I agree. I think for number 4, that's something we need to, as we talk about, and as she said, you know, as we look at it through the lens of being equity-centered and culturally responsive, we need to be proximate, right, to the very communities that we're trying to serve. So to her point, I think going back and actually explicitly expanding more on that parent involvement piece is critical. So thank you, Jenny, for that.
Are you ready for me? Amanda, do you mind continuing to share your slides?
Oh, yes.
I have notes on my deck. So my name is Taja McCobe, and I'm the Special Education Coordinator at Polytech High School. I also serve as the Equity and Diversity Chairperson, and we've been meeting for the last couple of years to see what we can do to make education more equitable and accessible for students of color. I was tasked with answering the following 2 questions, which states and districts have implemented weighted funding formulas based on student social economic status, and also how much weight is assigned and how is social economic status measured. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot when doing the research, but basically weighted student funding is a method that aims to give funds based on what students need. It's based on student needs instead of arbitrarily funding schools. And overwhelmingly in the United States, state and local governments, they provide around the same amount of funding for schools, and the federal government covers about or less than 10%. However, most of the funds do not go directly to the schools, but to the districts, where the districts decide how they are going to spend the money, and that is also inclusive of hiring staff, building and maintaining schools, and buying supplies. Those states that have the most progressive school funding, and progressive means utilizing funds for high poverty students or high poverty districts, versus regressive, which is basically the opposite, just spending money. It doesn't matter if there's poverty involved or not. States with the most progressive school funding tend to be the most economically segregated. And the reason for that is because it's easier to direct those funds to schools that have high poverty levels overall, versus if a district is wide or spread out. Miami is an example where it's a very large district. You have segments of high poverty, but because the district is so large, all the funds do not always go to the student that they should go to. I go to the next slide. Amanda, can you scroll down? So some statistics about weighted schools funding. In almost 24 states, high poverty schools get less money per student than low poverty schools. However, research supports that high poverty schools benefit more from more robust investment. So if they get investment that is strategically done, not just throwing money at the district, but that is actually beneficial. On average, the U.S. schools spend about $15,000 per student, but the range is from $9,700 per student, which is in Arizona, the lowest amount, to $26,000 per student in New York. So it's a wide range, about a $17,000 difference. Delaware is on the higher, Delaware is above the national average. Delaware spends about $17,030 per student. And I think we all can agree and know that it costs more to educate economically disadvantaged students. However, lower income districts, even though it costs more, they have students that require more. They usually serve more special education students, non-native English speakers, and other groups that require additional resources. The next slide has a graphic of how weighted student funding is implemented. And you'll see that New Orleans Parish is the only district that has more than 50% of the total funds allocated via weighted student funding. All the other districts except for Jefferson County, which is right on the line, is below 50% for weighted student funding. So regarding how weight is assigned and how social and economic status is measured, it varies by district. And I just have three districts that I picked out just to illustrate that. Boston Public Schools, they have 6 different funding weights. The lowest is 0.05, and it goes all the way up to 6.7. Baltimore County Public Schools, the weights range from 400. They didn't use a percentage, but they had a dollar amount, 400 to 700 additional funds perhaps per student. And Prince George's County Public Schools, the weights range from 0.08 to 0.71. And social economic status is overwhelmingly determined in states by free and reduced lunch, price lunch. But there's a shift occurring because experts have agreed that the traditional measure, just using free and reduced lunch, does not always capture the students who are in need. For instance, that is a self-report and the data is always shifting. There are a number of students living in poverty that have not been captured. So there have been other proposals for indicators to be used, such as the Child Nutrition and WIC program, the Affordable Health Care Act, the Housing Choice Voucher. Those are all being considered when considering social economic status. But right now in Delaware, what we are using is measuring that by the free and reduced public lunch program. That also includes SNAP and TAF, temporary assistance for needy families. So I highlighted 3 states that already implemented weighted student funding, and I went into a little more detail with Illinois. But Illinois has a evidence-based funding, that's what they call it, but it's pretty much the same thing. And what they did is they have their ELL students, teachers, special ed teachers, come up with an adequacy target. And they decide and discuss how much they think the state should, how much the state believes the school should spend, and they give more money to the under-resourced schools. Those schools that are furthest from their target are prioritized to receive the most funding, and low poverty schools, they received about $19,000 per student. High poverty schools received about $15,000 per student. So it wasn't quite equitable. So that is a low economic Black and ELF students. There's still funding gaps. However, progress is being made. When it started, there were over 150 school districts that were 60% off their target. Now it is about 16. So there's progress being made, but you can see as you, in the 4th bulleted point that there's not equity, complete equity, with the high poverty schools getting the most money, but they're making an effort to do so. In Utah, high poverty schools get 57% more funding than the state's low poverty schools, and Wyoming was noted as receiving an A in all metrics, which included funding level, funding distributions, and funding effort. So that is just a guide to perhaps look at. when we consider Delaware, which is the next slide, Delaware is a resource-based funding state. So what Delaware does is it considers the cost of staff salaries, course materials, energy expenses, and other costs. It's not weighted. We don't use weighted funding. We also have expected local share. Where district raise revenue, we have tax base and property taxes, so on and so forth, but there's no specific amount that is expected from the local share. And we also have funding differentiated on grade level. So we have categories for units, K through 3 and also 4 through 12. So K through 3, you don't have to have as many students to qualify for a unit as students who are in grades 4 through 12. And like Amanda was speaking of, we do have programs to address English language learners, poverty, gifted, and those categories, but that funding is through a grant. Increased funding through competitive, and the grant is competitive. Special education is a little different. It is still resource-based, but special education students are considered in 3 tiers: basic, intense, and complex. And those tiers generate units. So a basic unit is 8.4 students per unit, intense is 6.0, and complex is 2.6, which determines how many teachers are assigned. And again, for gifted students, there's no increased funding, and career and technical education, there is increased funding, and that is resource-based. I happen to work at a career and technical education school, so we do get a little bit, well, we get more money based on the career and technical areas. So recommendations that I suggested are to mandate that districts prioritize state funding for schools with high poverty, utilize progressive spending. What happens often is because the local funding and the state funding are somewhat equal. The state's funding or weighted funding, the state's funding could be more progressive, but then the local funds will be regressive. So it's just kind of falls flat, they're evened out. So when progressive spending, if we go that way, is implemented, you still have to be careful not to, okay, so the state is making their funding to be targeted and specific to certain programs and certain students, those who need those. But then when we get to the local side, because that's kind of decided at a local base, it sometimes counteracts what the state is doing. So overall progressive spending. Also implement weighted student funding. I think that is a great way to get the funding to students that need that funding. Definitely eliminate the need to apply for competitive grants to address the needs of ELL students and students with low social economic statuses. Because what if a district or whoever, the personnel, decide not to apply for the grant? Do the students not get what they're supposed to, what they should get to make them more successful? So across the board, it should be permanent and guaranteed funding for students who have that need. Also, actively target students versus districts. And for example, in Missouri, state and local funding became more aggressive due to a new funding formula, which provided additional money for disadvantaged students only to districts with higher than average low-income students. However, so disadvantaged students and less disadvantaged districts did not benefit because they were, and we were talking when we had one of our phone conversations, take Cape and Logan, for instance, which is usually considered a wealthy district, but of course there are students in that district who are low social economic status. So in Missouri, let's just say Cape was in Missouri, those students would not receive the benefit of having progressive funding or increased money because they're in a district and the money goes to the district, not so much to the student, and that money can be spread out. So even though they're in a wealthy district, they still may need supports. So keep in mind that the students should be targeted, not the districts. And finally, invest in teacher salaries and school facilities. I was reading a study by Burnett, which said, and I think Amanda touched on this as well, teachers who get paid more are usually teachers who perform better in the classroom. There's a direct correlation between pay, and there's a direct correlation between pay and student performance on assessments, performance, so on and so forth. Burnett, he recommended $100,000 for like upwards towards that for teachers. And then as Amanda was saying, like those teachers who become better, they start getting the classes that they want. And usually the classes that they want are the students who are not as high needs or not as demanding. And that comes with seniority and just kind of, I put my time in with these harder to serve students. So it's time for me to get the gravy class, but their skills and their expertise would be better served in classes with students who have more severe needs. And that also goes to school facilities. Research has supported that students who attend schools that are newer or better facilities, they do well, I guess, because they're in a space where they don't have air conditioners in the windows, they're comfortable. It makes sense, but I think it's worth mentioning that having a good school facility, and there's research that supports student performance on tests and academically increased when they went into a new school. So there are some things like that that people may not think about that does affect how students do. And I think it also shows that students see that there's an investment being made into them. They're not just thrown into a certain school because of their economic status. And it was mentioned, I think students are just more aware and wise than when I was growing up. You know, they just know, and they can basically read the room. So are there any questions on that?
Thank you for that presentation. I have a question specifically on number 3. Did you actually find a state that actually that the funding targets the student, so the money goes where the student goes?
Illinois was trying to do that, and also New York, but New York is easier for them because in New York, the way their districts are, it aligns with the neighborhood. So it's easier to give that funding to those high needs areas because their district is pretty much all high needs versus the example I said in Miami, where it's spread out all over, like it's a very large district, and the district gets the money and they determine what schools gets what, and then I guess the principal decides what their priorities are. They have a lot of choice. So Illinois was trying, there was success with that, and New York, but like it was easier with New York because of the way that their neighborhoods are set up. But I do have that I can share a whole study on this different schools that have implemented this district's use of weighted student funding. It's 126 pages with case studies of different districts that I can share.
Please do. I'm curious to see, as we all know, there's no secret that our funding model is out of date and needs to be updated, which I believe the property reassessment is currently happening, especially here in Newcastle County and throughout the state. So in the upcoming, hopefully it won't take a full complete year, but once that we receive that data, our school funding model will be changed, but it will be to what? And how will those changes impact the students in making sure that the schools who need the most money the most, and it may not necessarily be the districts, but those conversations definitely, I agree, need to be had. So thank you. Kyrie has his hand up.
Maybe this is a personal gripe, but I know being a middle school teacher, it seems like a lot of the funding, when you allow the districts to choose, it goes to elementary and it goes to high school. They are the two show ponies that make them be able to check a box off. And a lot of times that 6 through 8 is kind of forgotten in this. And this is the age of enlightenment for them. They are starting to come into themselves. They are now starting to realize certain things, and we are not serving them. I hope that we kind of put a little bit more emphasis on it. You know, the children are sweet and kind when they're in elementary, and all of a sudden you get to middle school and they get big enough to look like adults in some cases. And again, I go back to implicit biases, and I just hope that we start to focus a little bit more on the middle school level, because it seems as if they step into that arena, the parents step into that arena, and they are lost at that point. And then all of a sudden you are force-fed standards, you're force-fed, all of a sudden now it matters. And I think there's a drop-off in middle school where I hope that what we're talking about starts to really hit that 3-grade sector, because that's where we're losing a lot of our kids. Because by the time they get to high school, many of them all of a sudden become R9s, repeated 9s, and you're repeated 10. And I appreciate everything that everyone's doing. Like I said, this may be my own personal gripe being a middle school teacher, but I hope this funding is focused towards those 3 years, which are so important to the success of high school and continuing the work that you've done in elementary.
Thank you for acknowledging us, Kyrie. I'm a middle school teacher too, and I often tell everyone middle school is the most important years, the most critical and crucial years of a student, because that's when they decide, especially in environments that are in public health crisis and don't necessarily have the resources to make other decisions. And those are conversations that I am comfortable with keep bringing up and reminding individuals as these conversations begin to happen. So Jenny and then Sharito.
This will be quick, but Kyrie, thank you for bringing that up. Dr. McCove, you noted in your presentation around funding models, you talked about Perkins funding. And so because Perkins funding has now been extended through 5th grade, the CTE team, which I serve on at the Department of Ed, is now emphasizing reformation and funding in middle grades through a CTE lens with a focus on SEL, social justice and equity. So I'm co-leading that with Luke Ryan, the director. So we are really, 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 really excited to be rolling this out. There's a definitive timeline, there's extensive funding. We are getting ready to invite a fairly significant group of folks from around the state to engage in a steering committee and lead this work. So everything y'all are talking about, we are thinking about, and I want to continue to have this conversation so that the work that we do is informed specifically by teachers, students, and families who often aren't, and community-based organizations who often aren't engaged in some of these like high-level conversations. So I say that to all of you with great hopes that we will be doing, I go to bed thinking, what if we did this right? Like, what if we got it right? And so, yes, the funding is coming, the model is coming, and there will be time to revise it with stakeholder input. So I'll be very excited to share more.
That's very I have a question, Jenny. When those conversations are happening before, I guess the process is before everybody comes in a group and thinks about what this model should look like, and then it's brought forth for recommendations for changes and everything, just like we're doing here, correct? I just want to make sure that the
Representative Moore, trust me when I tell you that the amount of thought going into who's going to participate in this macro group has been discussed over and over and over so that the right folks and the right representation is at the table. So we are considering that it is a priority. Thank you.
All right, Sharito.
Thank you. I'm hearing about funding, and I always thinking in how funding could go to get data that in places where it had been unthinkable. So for example, thinking in ELL, ESL students, as far as I know, and I am not embedded in the educational system of Delaware or any other, but I would like to know if we ever get data from ELL students and ESL students of how much they bring to the school culture just by their presence. You know, how they impact a person just for being there and being different, and how much that educates and enlightens and enrich the life of those that are not like them. And how much just the word, you know, a different last name, a different way to pronounce their first names, that the students have to learn how to say Juan, Rojaldo, or whatever names that they are not familiar with, how much that enrich and open their horizons, and how much are we really getting that is part of the contribution, let alone, you know, to say hello, hola, or many other things in the language. And in geography, you know, where do you come from Honduras? Where is that? And that kind of little interactions, how can data can capture the richness of the students? So we can go even beyond that and utilize students that cannot speak English very well, but still are providing diversity, high level in real life to the school environment and the other students, even to administrators and teachers. How can that be captured with new funding? How can we make that to happen? Because otherwise, there is this colonialized mentality and patronized mentality that ELL students and ESL students are the ones that we need to put money into them. Never, ever, ever validating. And I really think that this African American task force and this opportunity can benefit the Brown as well, and is benefiting the Brown as well. And that is the beauty of how all the efforts of African Americans benefit the whole society. And I think this could be one that could make a big difference.
I think you bring up a very good point. It would be nice to see that data. I don't think of any research that exists about that question, but it is definitely something that has come up when I was researching culturally responsive teaching. We did a seminar at the very beginning of the school year, and how when considering culturally responsive teaching, just all the talents that students who speak another language bring to the table, because they're often translating business transactions for their parents. They're navigating, they're so knowledgeable, and they have so much value. And oftentimes, I mean, I hate to say it, but sometimes students who speak another language or have to learn it, they're not, I don't think, like you said, value as much as they should. But then you get to high school and learning another language is a requirement to graduate. So then the value is seen in high school, but they should feel that throughout their educational experience. That's a very good point, and I would love to see something along those lines, and definitely impart that to the students, that they are not a burden, but valued.
Exactly. I remember how when I was in Ecuador, you know, in my second grade, and in vacations, one of us had gone to United States, had come here, and the teacher, guess what she did? Oh, you were on vacation in United States. It's a different country in the north. Wow, we were learning geography that moment. And then the teacher said, well, why don't you tell us the English words that you learn? And we are gonna learn. And she was saying, hello. She was saying, good morning, Father, Saturday. And we were amazed that a person just like us will know something that we didn't know. I bet she felt beautifully proud. And, you know, some of of us were envious. Some of them were just, oh gosh, we can learn too. But I want to see our Latino students in that position use, because now you have data, because remember, data driven, that was a big thing in the whole state in one, 2 or 3 years. I remember that. So then how can we use that data? First of all, getting it, because this is something I've never been getting, and then use it for these students to be the light of the others in what they can provide. Thank you.
I think this goes again to teachers' implicit biases and not being trained fully. I think again it comes to that we're late on the education of the people that we put in front of our students. No different than our Latinx students who are kind of piggybacking from the African American movement that we are doing. There's other nationalities that come here. I have a Russian student who pretty much gets no education in my class. They don't encourage them to use the Google Translate. So when you come into my class, and it's also a thing of, I have an 8th grade class that I have 6 students from our ELL that get put into an 8th grade class because they want to put them next to another student from that class, but yet are not being served properly. So again, we really got to see where we are not being equitable, even in that aspect of children coming in there that are not being served, not being, their voice is not being heard. I did a mindful moment and I used a couple Russian words and allowed her to kind of do exactly what you had said. Again, it comes down to you get there and you're not prepared. What are we doing to prepare our teachers that they are ready to serve the children, that they are, or being willing to step outside their comfort zone to accommodate a public school? That's the situation that I'm in, where you're not choosing what student you're getting. So again, I hope that we address that issue also.
Think it. Oh.
Go ahead, Amanda, and then we'll go ahead and do public comment.
I was just going to say, I think that kind of goes back to the statement you mentioned earlier about teacher burnout. I think a lot of these things easily fall by the wayside because everybody's so exhausted and it's one more thing. And even though it's an important thing, you also have 50,000 other important things. And then it kind of relies on each individual to kind of do their own like self-prioritizing. And, some of these issues may not be the most important to everybody. So hopefully part of the funding conversation will include things that will help kind of take some of these loads off so that teachers can focus on the most important things for all students, and so that more resources can be put in the schools that can help with ELL students. And, I believe there's some schools that don't have ELL support because they can't find it. So it's, aside from just funding, it's like as a state, what are we doing to get some more people into the education system to fill these vacancies and to, just kind of grow? Because at, where we're at now, we can make all the plans we want, but we got to get the people there to implement the plans. And I think that's something that kind of requires immediate attention as well.
I agree. Thank you. Only because we are a little 10 minutes over time and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We're going to go ahead and open it up for public comment.
Okay, we have one member of the public with us. So if you would like to give a comment, please use the raise hand feature on Zoom. And if not, that's totally okay. But for anybody watching on the YouTube live stream, you can always submit public comment to African American Task Force at delaware.gov. And I turn it back over to you, Rep. Moore.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple announcements, but before we go, how are we feeling about these recommendations forth by the work group tonight? Are we okay with the refinding of some of the definitions of the recommendations, that the recommendations are okay for each subtopic they presented tonight? So normally I say silence means yes, that there's no questions, comments, and concerns. So I'll take a voice vote to accept the recommendations from the SEL and Poverty Committee.
I think we actually need to do a roll call vote.
Oh, okay. Well, roll call vote it is. Go ahead, Caitlin.
Okay. So I'm just going to go down the list using this attendance slide. So Representative Moore.
Yes.
Okay. Representative Wilson Anton.
Yes.
Okay. Kyrie Bay.
Yes.
And am I pronouncing that right?
Yes, Kyrie
Okay.
Bay.
All right. I just don't want to mispronounce anybody's name. Gloria Ho.
Yes.
Okay. Amanda Holman.
Yes.
Jamie Bailey.
Yes.
Okay. Stephanie Ingram.
Yes.
Okay. Jermaine Solomon.
Yes.
Ginny Furcucci.
Yes.
Monique Martin.
No.
Dr. Tasia McCove.
Yes.
Dr. Michael Harp. Dr. Harp, are you still with us? All right, I will circle back to him. Charito Calvachi Mateco.
I would like to know if there is going to be some refinement of the language of the comments that we have done. So, you know, because there have been concerns in clarifications, or are we voting to just keep it exactly the way it is? In that case, you know, I will say no, but if there is the possibility to refining a little bit, and then I would say yes.
So no, we're voting on that. We're accepting these as recommendations, and there will be fine tuned before the actual report is produced and put out to the public. So all these recommendations are going to be compiled and presented to the actual African American Task Force. Before we present anything to the African American Task Force, we as a committee will take time to look at all the recommendations that have come out. Like, it will be sent to you all, and everybody will be able to reply with feedback. So again, every meeting is being recorded. We are going to take all these notes, all these recommendations, and what's submitted with, if you had questions, comments, or concern addressed within the meeting, this is like a whole group conversation. We will take that into consideration as we develop and start to expand on what these recommendations mean.
Then I say yes, if that's the case.
I am giving you my word that will be the case.
Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, and I'm going to circle back to Dr. Michael Harp. Are you with us?
Yes, I'm with you.
Okay, and what is your vote on these recommendations?
Let's, I approve them, and let's have a vote for the body.
Okay, so a vote to accept. Thank you. Okay, so Madam Chairs, we have 12 members voting yes and 1 member voting no.
Wow.
Do we have, well, that's 13. So do we have a quorum? Does that vote carry at all then?
Yes, so 12 is our quorum.
Oh, okay.
13 members voted.
I asked, I'm just wondering, Ms. Martin, was it the same concern that you had that was mentioned by Trito in regards to the no vote? I'm just curious.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question? You said Ms. Martin?
Yeah, I didn't know if we were allowed to ask. I'm just.
Oh, you can, go ahead. I mean,
Okay.
if you want to answer.
Yeah, I'm just curious if it was due to the language and the recommendations needing to be fine-tuned, or if it was something more major than that.
So it was a couple of things. It's not that I oppose the direction of the recommendations, but I know how specific we need to be, ensuring that the language is action oriented, and then also crosswalking what's already there to the recommendation so that we can avoid any redundancy. I saw a couple of the recommendations that if I were to prioritize them, a couple may have been eliminated only because I may have more insights comprehensively of what is available or what has been done, only because of my vantage point, whereas somebody else may not know that it exists. I don't want us to reinvent the wheel. So that was the preface. It wasn't because I disagreed with them. I agree with all of them. I just think that we may be able to crosswalk them and make room for more innovative recommendations. That's all. But I do agree with them. But I think that our recommendations need to incorporate a little more rigor based on where we are.
Could I speak on that also? I voted yes under the assumption that this will be the crosswalk definitely needs to be redone because of many points that we are making have already been kind of hashed out in different arenas. And I've been on many of the SEL and committees, subcommittees. So I'm under the assumption that we are definitely going to use the resources that are already readily available, that have been done already, that we incorporate some of the other members, some other people that have done this work. So I do say yes again to where we're going, but there are some things need to be pinpointed a little bit better. I don't want to say better or worse, but some things are already in progress that we could utilize. Those resources are there. So I still say yes.
Thank you, and I acknowledge both Monique and Kyrie's concerns. So what I want to say is that what happens with recommendations in subcommittees and just task force in general, these recommendations are there so that people in the decision, in the legislature, can do something with this and expand on it. There is no piece of legislation that is going to come through. And if there is something that, for example, DOE is already working on, DOE is going to say, we saw this through the pipeline, or these are conversations that is happening on this topic. Let's come together. In my experience from working not only with the legislature, but also being a representative now, at some point, those paths is going to cross. Hopefully other organs, the only thing is, as you see, we only have one person in public comments right now. We need more people to participate so we understand what is going on. A lot of everyone who's sitting on this subcommittee was handpicked for a reason, whether it's because I already knew you were working on the work that I wanted to target with this subcommittee, whether that is advocacy or it's your day job or you're passionate about all things topic related. Everybody is here because you're connected some way. Please encourage people to come and sit in on these meetings because I want to hear their input. I don't know, there's Delaware, even though we're a small state, is big enough that there are a lot of silos working on this. To Monique's point, I don't want to reinvent the wheel, but the wheel is being invented in several different places that needs to come together and merge. How do we do that is the question. And if we need to talk one off, please, I will have Caitlin to make sure that every one of you have my cell phone number because I am accessible other than when I'm not teaching in the classroom. But outside of classroom hours, call me, send me a text. I will reply. You know, I offer to have meetings and have sit downs with you all because this work is important to me. I see it happening every single day. And Kyrie touched on teacher burnout. I'm June burnt out already, and it's not even Christmas break. So just as much as students need SEL support, so does teachers. You know, we need to make sure we self-care as well. And so that way we can teach our students too. So there is some of these things, even though we're just scratching the surface, I know for a fact it's multi-layered. You know, I know that there is more specific wording. So when only thing that I ask is when we send those recommendations out after they have been put together and compiled, that you come and you give feedback, whether it's, I think this should say this, or this is a better way to say that, please. So when we submit the final report, you are proud that you stood on this subcommittee and that you worked on these recommendations instead of shying away and say, yeah, I was a part of that work, but that wasn't me. I've had those conversations with some subcommittee members on other task forces too. We're all in this together, and there are a few announcements to be made as well. Before I'm gonna try to get us out of here by 9 o'clock. Please excuse the dinosaurs in that is not extinct in my background. We are having a meeting. We do have 2 meetings this month. Our next meeting is December 16th. The school to prison pipeline will be presenting as well. We have to redo the calendar a little bit, adjust the calendar a little bit. I do believe that the calendar will be pushed back. We will have 2 presentations on experts who are making way in teacher diversity. So the teacher diversity presentation work group will go in February. Did I get that correct, Caitlin?
Yes. So school to prison pipeline December, guest presentation January, teacher diversity subgroup presentation February.
Yes. Any questions, any final questions with 5 minutes to Sharito? You have your hand up. Go ahead.
No, I'm so sorry. No, I didn't. It was a mistake. I already made my mind. Thank you.
It's all right. Stephanie, go ahead.
I know last month we tabled the recommendations and I completely have forgotten which committee that was. Do we need?
Is the cultural responsive standards. So, and I'll put this out there to the committee. We're going to circle back to it. There will be a work group poll that will be coming out soon. We're just trying to finalize the details of how this will be done. A lot of us had concerns. A lot of us had questions. The end result is that we are going to do a framework to present, to make sure, like in our final report for this subcommittee, I want a framework of what those cultural standards should look like, with recommendations from the individual who wants to work on those. So that will be a separate date that we have to do. So the recommendations from that work group is still tabled until we can go through with a physical action plan to make sure that we have a outline to move forward with, to go.
And then my second question goes to the recommendations of all the groups so far. Is there a way that we can have those given to us so we can review them ahead of time? Because I know you spoke to the fact that we can review them, but we've had a lot of recommendations, and I think it would be valuable if we had them kind of in a condensed form.
So the initial request was to have for each work group to have the slides to us a week before so we can share. But due to trying to figure out how to work together and be compliant of the FOIA rule, it's been a little difficult to get those within time. So the presentations aren't going out until a couple of days before the meeting. So we, other than the school to prison pipeline, the teacher diversity group has enough time to make sure that we have the slides. So have the slides before the actual meet, at least a week before, because I read the slides and go back for feedback. What I don't want to happen is I still apologize to the first group that went the day before. I had them to change it up a little bit, which I had to be apologetic for. And I don't want that because I respect everyone's time. Some of us don't have any extra time to give, but we're here because we're passionate about this work.
Right, and I'm asking, can we have the presentations that have been given so far?
Oh, that has been given so far.
Yes,
Caitlin, I believe these.
Are you just talking about like the PowerPoint slides?
Yeah, I would like to be able to see the recommendations of all of the groups that have presented so far.
Yes, I mean, so far there was one presentation and those slides were emailed to everybody, but I can resend them.
All right, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And as well as tonight's.
Sorry, I misinterpreted the question. But yes, all right. Any other final questions with 1 minute remaining? All right, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved. Oh.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. See you in 2 weeks.
Thank
Good
you
night.
all.